Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Iblis Manifestations Podcast. This channel features lengthy off-limits conversations with various different artists and entrepreneurs, predominantly from the underground metal scene. We take deep dives into the topics of life, music, spirituality, and take insight from a variety of thought-provoking perspectives from personalities who you don't often hear from in a mainstream settings. I am your host, Cheyenne, and I was originally born and raised in Iran and currently reside in the UK. I am the frontman and founding member of the black death metal band Trivex, who have been active since 2009. The band originally started in the Islamic Republic of Iran, where such type of music is banned as well as a punishable offense. You can check the band's pages for any updates on tour dates as well as new music. I am also a personal trainer and an online fitness coach who specializes in people achieving the best versions of themselves physically and mentally. Having been someone who was once extremely out of shape and overweight, I find it to be my duty to be able to pass on the information and knowledge which I've gained to help others achieve the same transformation. The Iblis Manifestations Podcast also features a variety of solo episodes where I discuss personal experiences and anecdotes in a very candid fashion, covering everything from mental health, spirituality, philosophy, and even paranormal experiences. This is the Iblis Manifestations Podcast. To support it, be sure to subscribe to the channel and visit the link in the descriptions.
It's great talking to you, Cheyenne, really. And best of luck to your endeavors for this podcast. I think it's a great initiative.
You're my favorite person to talk to for interviews and stuff. So I love what you're espousing out here. I love the knowledge and the perspectives that you're curating through this, and I'm just so honored to be a part of it. Thank you.
As I told you, it was one of the most interesting interviews I've ever had, because we talk a lot more things than just music, and I really appreciated that.
I respect you deeply, and it's an honor to be here.
And friends, remember as always, better to die on your feet than to live on your knees. Enjoy the podcast. All right, Kyle, sir, welcome back to Iblis Manifestations, round 4. How the fuck are we doing?
Doing pretty well, man. Doing pretty well. So, I had an interesting, probably about half a year, but I'm doing pretty well now. So, as you might know, I was in a car wreck and had some pretty fucked up medical shit going on, but recovering well, and I'm back at the gym 5 days a week, so can't really complain, man.
It's cool. I was gonna say you're looking well.
Ah, thanks.
Yeah, man. It's so a few things happened since the last time we spoke as well. First of all, some of the pictures that you were sending me of your place fucking looks killer, man. If you want to tell me, come up with the perfect black metal environment, I would literally I wouldn't even be able to imagine what you've already got right now. You say you're quite far out from any kind of neighbors, right?
Yeah, I'm really far out. I'm far out from neighbors. I'm far out from even other mountain towns. So the closest proper mountain town, which, there's not even a whole lot there, would probably be Divide, Colorado. Divide, Colorado is like a sheriff's department, a grocery store. I think there's one or two bars right there, 2 gas stations or something like that. And that's about it. And I'm a good 45 minutes into the woods past that, so I'm pretty remote, man. And there's not many neighbors out here. If you get out and go down the road that I live on, you're gonna be on it for a while. For one, For two, you're going to see a whole lot of signs that say no trespassing, turn around.
Right
Not
on.
maintained by the county, which I love. Yeah, it's great. And then you damn near get to where it dead ends before you hit my house. And so the neighbors are all quite a hike away. And most of them, you pass a couple cabins on the way in, but most of them you just see their gates and you don't even see their houses. So, and then it's real thick, dense woods on the way in. There's a lot
Mm.
of spruce and pine and lots of aspens, which is cool because I fucking love aspen trees. But then
Yeah.
right before you get to my house, it's fire blasted woods from this major fire that happened over 20 years ago. So it's a unique area once you get up to my house. So it's very desolate looking because it's just burnt down forest all around me. So yeah, as far as like black metal atmosphere, I couldn't possibly ask for more. So yeah.
Yeah, man. Fucking true that. Do you ever get nervous being that far out from everyone?
Nah.
No.
I suppose if I had some kind of medical event, then I'd probably be fucked, So,
Yeah.
yeah, it'd be tough. There's no cell service out here either. I mean, I've got fucking Starlink at my house, of course. I'm fine once I'm in or near my house, but for a good, I don't know, 15, 20 plus minutes on the drive, you don't have any cell service. So
It's like that Rocky meme. If he dies, he dies.
he dies. Exactly.
Nah, that's awesome, man. I already said to you before, I would absolutely love to visit your neck of the woods. I'm yet to even come to States, but hopefully very soon we might be able to make our way there. I know a lot of people are kind of disheartened about what's going on over there. I'd be, less disheartened and more happy to actually just come and visit and see the country for
Sure.
what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's people get caught up on like the politics and all that kind of shit, or wherever they fall on that. But America, there's a lot to see. There's the cities, of course, but there's so much land mass that there's so much of it that's wide open and wild and rural. So there's if you're into nature, there's tons to see. It's a very diverse in its nature and just tons and tons of stuff to kind of explore.
For sure. And also in Colorado, I understand you've got I don't know if that's exactly where you're at, 'cause I understand it's a large state, but I know that you got the mountains from Coors Light as well. I mean, I quit drinking now, but
Yeah.
more than familiar with those mountains,
Yeah, that's near Golden, Colorado. So that's quite a bit further north than where I'm at. But yeah.
Yeah. For sure. No, I would absolutely love to visit, man. Listen, it's really cool to do this round 4 together. I realized that this is like 3 years since we did the first one, so it was only like that time's fucking flown by, man. That's fucking crazy.
It really has. Yeah. A lot of shit has happened in that 3 years. So
Yeah, for sure. Well, it's my pleasure, man. And it's one thing that people don't know about that one. And that first episode kind of became notorious in its own ways. When that made its way to like Reddit platforms and all kinds of stuff for the right reason. I think the timing had everything to do with it.
sure.
Because we actually like postponed it twice, and then on the third time we did it, it was like the day after you guys made some announcements, which we've already discussed all of that here previously. Yeah, but I think the timing worked out very well. So when we did the last one together, which was in Bergen, and that was a fucking killer chat. But like literally a day or two after that, you guys had your fucking van broken into. That was like just a day or two after you and I spoke, so it wasn't included in the episode.
Yeah.
But what the fuck happened? Did you guys manage to? So I know there was like a crowdfunding thing, and maybe you guys got some of it back. But what was going on there?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know because I wasn't present for it. So, I was in the venue and just caught the aftermath. But apparently someone broke into the fucking van and took a couple bags, just swiped a couple bags quickly. And one of those happened to be the bag that had all of our merchandise, money from the tour so far, which was a big portion of the tour. So yeah,
Ouch.
that wasn't good. Yeah. So, Parasite Gallows did our booking agency did a GoFundMe, and we were able to get the majority of that back, thankfully. So cheers to everyone that helped out with that.
That's good to hear, man. Yeah, I put a little bit towards it, and I know quite a few people who did as well. Yeah, of course, man. It's what we do. But yeah, that's a fuck thing, because when you're touring, the deals that you get with promoters aren't always enough. So you are actually kind of relying on the merch sales just to even break even on the cost, let alone make any profit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's where you're going to make all your money. So without that, you're pretty much fucked. So
yeah. And when you're at home, the fucking IRS are coming after you for the merch sales. Like you told me, man.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah, that's completely fucked. Like what you were telling me, this wasn't a part of any of our recorded conversations, but what you were saying to me about what they're doing with the taxation and stuff, it's completely fucked. I don't know. Have you come to any resolve with that? Because I noticed you have continued selling merch elsewhere. So I don't know what's going on.
Well, it's about to get more complicated with depending on whether or not you've got stuff coming in from outside the U.S. as far as your merchandise, because the tariffs. So
tariffs, of course.
Yeah, so that's gonna. I don't think it'll affect me quite as much because I don't have a whole lot of that going on. But yeah, and then just the taxes are just, it's just high. So and of course I was caught up in when I started doing Noxiel, which is my own merch web store. I was just doing it by the seat of my pants. I didn't know what the fuck I was doing, and I think I started in like 2020, something like that, and just selling my own band shirts. And I didn't bother to register as a business or file taxes as a business. And then they started retroactively the government, because they realized, hey, all these people like Etsy sellers and people selling shit through PayPal, they weren't getting hit with taxes on any of it. So, it's like eventually they retroactively were like from 2021 forward, we're like, all right, you didn't file taxes on this. We got they get the information from PayPal or Stripe or whatever your money service is. And all of a sudden everyone's getting hit with all these taxes, years later. And so I got hit with that, and it was like, I ended up owing quite a bit. It was like $16,000 the first year, which, is a lot for me to suddenly just owe. And then it's just been, after that, it was like, then I got hit the next year. I paid that down. The next year they're like, all right, this is for 22, 23, and so that's after the first year, then I started doing it correctly and filing as a business and all that, which certainly helps big time, but it's still a really big hit. So it's just, the reality is you got to realize, like, on your shirts and whatever it is, whatever you're selling, you're just going to be making a couple bucks off each one at the end of the day. So
yeah, well, it's a good job you're not solely making a living from music. That's the first thing.
Oh no, there's no way I could. There's no possibility of that. So
yeah. Well, I'm sure there's someone hearing that right now, getting disappointed, like, I think you just crushed their black metal dreams. Like, oh no, I can't make a living doing this.
Yeah, well, there's that fucking whatever percent, that 1% of bands that are making a living off of it, and most of their bands probably fucking suck. Oh.
Yeah.
See what bad juju, man.
What? I saw that, bro. Yeah. What the fuck? Wow, we got that on camera. Fuck yeah. Yeah, I mean, is it windy there? Have you got the door open or something?
Yeah, I do have my fan on up here, so who fucking knows? But yeah.
Yeah, there we go. That's that. Okay, well, with that said, I think we can perfectly segue into it. So, have you had any interest in feverish activities happening in the new place, since we just, well, other than what we just saw happen?
No, I truthfully, it's, when I found this place, I was actually looking for something older, and I mean, it's rustic, but this it's a cabin home, and but it's only 13 years old. So
right, okay.
And yeah, not a lot of time to accumulate all the energy from people passing away inside of it.
Not
That's
quite.
usually at the top of my list. Hunting for a house is finding some kind of relic.
Is it
It's
actually, or are you just
it's only 13 years old. Yeah,
Okay.
it's a very new build.
No, but what
So-
I mean is like, is that something that you've actually been looking for? Like, find a
Oh
place
yeah,
where.
absolutely. Yeah, I mean,
Alright.
because this is the first time I purchased a home, so of course, I was like, I'm gonna get the place, that I want to see myself in, which I imagined something either like kind of like more like old Victorian or like old farmhouse or really old cabin. And this is just how it panned out, though. Is it's an A-frame, a beautiful house, and in a really the surrounding, it's such a haunted surrounding that really sold me, and how remote it was, because it was by far the most remote area out of any of the ones I looked at. So I also got it for quite a bit cheaper than it's worth, and I think that's just because it sat on the market forever, because no one wants to live out in the middle of a fucking desolate fucking fire blasted forest except for me. So
Of course.
yeah,
No, it had to be you, man. Had your name on it.
it did, but no strange paranormal activity so far. I'm sad to report. So
Until now.
until now, yeah, until I talk shit and then shit fell off the fucking
Yeah.
So I was at least kind of hoping that that maybe it was ancient native burial site. That's the best you can hope for. So
Yeah. Or the worst, depending on your
yeah,
orientation.
best or
Yeah.
worse,
Yeah.
depending on who you are. So
Absolutely, man. Yeah. Well, yeah, for anyone who missed that, by the way, I know this was such a brutal segue in the subject, but for anyone who's listening on Spotify, go and watch the YouTube video. Make a note of the timestamp and go watch what just happened. But that was quite fascinating.
yeah,
Not the first time something like that's happened on the podcast, by the way. I should report. I had
no,
what's his name? Yeah, I had Lugubrem. Franco Munoz from Mexico on here. He's a big promoter down there, but he's also got his own band and stuff. I don't know if you guys have ever worked with him. You should, by the way, if you've never played Mexico way before. He brought out this fucking occult flute, and then he started like blowing into it. And then the fucking camera just like broke. It started like falling sideways, and the audio went weird. It was like really fucking weird shit.
yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know. I may not have met the guy. We did do a little we did a short Mexico run a couple years ago. So
Yeah, that's cool, man. That's cool. It's really cool to see like how far Akhlys have come, to be honest with you, man. Because I was thinking about this prior to our conversation, because it's like, some years ago when I guess Akhlys is, I always think of it as the first album, but technically your second record, when that came out, that was still a time where Akhlys was like very much this like new up and coming project. You were still predominantly known for Nightbringer at that point, but it's cool to see how Akhlys has actually like taken over to be, I suppose, the most notorious of all of the many projects that you've been a part of over the years. How do you feel about that as an artist, generally speaking?
Well, it's certainly been the most successful one. And I mean, at the time I did it, I had no idea that it would be, that successful. Nor did I give a shit, truthfully. I was really just kind of doing it because I wanted to do it, and I didn't really expect much to come of it, And it didn't just like blow up right away. It kind of like just gained traction over probably a year after it was released, but it really, really, really gained a ton of traction, suddenly, and it just kind of took off and became by far the biggest thing I had done at that time, which was weird because I'd put so many years and so much of myself into Nightbringer, that this was just supposed to be a kind of just a side project deal that I was just kind of playing with. And so So yeah, that was kind of strange. Just didn't see it coming, and then it keeps going from there apparently.
Well, I remember listening to it pretty much around the time it came out. I think 2016 or 2017. I was listening to it, and did it come out in 2015? Do I remember that correctly?
I want to say 2015. Yeah, I should probably know these things, but
yeah, no, I think it was around like early 2017, maybe, when I was listening to it. Because it's the artwork. It's the artwork that captures your attention. First thing, it's like,
yeah, I think that was a big part of it. What really drew a lot of people to it, because there's so many great albums out there that just go under the fucking radar, because either they're not promoted or or maybe the artwork isn't, as captivating or doesn't stand out as much or whatever it is. So, but regardless of artwork, you can have an amazing artwork and then have a shit album too. So, it's kind of.
I was gonna say it goes the other way as well, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's just one of those things, man. I remember seeing it and being like, "Fuck, this looks creepy as shit. Let's listen to it. Oh, it sounds equally creepy as shit, if not worse."
Yeah, that was David Herreras, the artist, and one of my old friends. I haven't talked to him in quite some time now, but he did that for us. Like, it was a commission piece, so I kind of explained to him what the band was about and the the kind of the aesthetic and spirit that I had in mind, and he just went wild with it, and it came out fucking amazing. So
yeah, David's a great artist. Credit to him for that. And so it's cool for me to hear that it was a commission piece, because to me it even seems like that you weren't necessarily having any massive plans for it, but how did it necessarily go from your first album with Akhlys, which is just like an ambient record, which is still very cool for what that particular style, given it's probably not something you're necessarily going to be able to play live, although I'm sure some people would be interested to hear that. If you ever decided to just go in on your own and do something like that, that'd actually probably be pretty cool. Promoters listening, here's your chance now. But it was pretty cool going from just that to the second album, where it's like a full band setting. It's a black metal album. You got the guitars, you got the vibe. I mean, what made you want to transcend that project into what it became, instead of just, I don't know, making a new band or using the music for something else? What was it? Was there something specific at the back of your mind that made you think, I'm going to take this to the next level? Or was it just something organic that just sort of happened and you just went with it?
Yeah, I think I really just kind of had been chasing this idea of having something that was kind of more like truly like hybrid, dark ambient and black metal,
Right.
And I've always had a love for dark ambient. So after I did the first one and just was getting ideas on even on the first one, where I was thinking like, man, you could have added like guitars over this one part, or and so trying to take that approach, which it's not completely novel. There's other bands that have done it before me and still do it, take that approach, but instead of just using the your standard keyboards, traditional black metal keyboards, like with choir Oz or strings or whatever, that you're using like stuff that would be more traditionally found in like dark ambient or death industrial or something like that. And so I really just decided I would just add the instrumentation to it, and then it just kind of started going in its own direction. But even after Dreaming Eye, it was like still wasn't there. So I'm perpetually chasing, after, every album that I've done so far is, I still have this idea in mind where it's going to be, more of that. And maybe it's an idea that I'll never fully, catch, or one of those things that you can't quite fully manifest, but it's in the chasing of it is perhaps where some of the beauty comes. So.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think one of the coolest things about Akhlys as a project as a whole is the fact that there's that continuous progression. So like, even though there's kind of like a signature sound, There kind of isn't, because all of the albums sound different. Obviously, with the first one being the most different, but from Dreamy Night to Malinois to House of Black Geminis, it's kind of like, they all have their own different sounds. And also another thing to add to that is the fact that you use, if I'm not mistaken, use B standard guitars. Is that correct?
Yep.
Yeah. So that's a very rare thing already.
Yeah. Yeah, people haven't really said much about that, or don't seem to pick up on it so much. So typically that's usually a death metal tuning, but
Exactly.
I've always had a lot of death metal influence. Always since the beginning. I mean, even Nightbringer, the majority of besides the very early stuff, it's in B as well. And I just I've never looked at it like. I do remember like hearing comments like in the Nightbringer days, just like, oh, that's not black metal then. like these diehards with the fucking rules, like if it's not tuned to E, it's not black metal, and it's just like, yeah, go fuck yourself, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
And just for me, the reason for it is, I mean, for me personally, I just think it's just the most evil tuning, and that's completely subjective. But just for me, I do, I just really like that low end tuning with it, and and we're also known for very high pitched riffs. So you've got the full spectrum there, even with just the B standard. We're climbing up to the 24th fret on our highest strings, and so you've got this very wide range there where usually our leads tend to do that, while when I'm playing the rhythms live, I'm usually kind of staying to really low or kind of mid area. So yeah,
for sure. Well, one thing that I really liked about the latest one is that you actually make a really good point, because if you got B standard, you kind of get to choose where the key of the song is gonna be, and you can just go up the fretboard as much as you want. I mean, I know this is
exactly.
Again, not a black metal example, but this is one thing that Nile do quite a lot. They're in like drop A, which is just fucking outrageous.
Yeah, that's insane.
But I suppose it's only like a couple of steps different from what you guys are playing, so maybe not that crazy in that sense. But they have a lot of songs that are like, they start on like the 5th or like the 7th fret, But one thing that I guess is cool with Akhlys is that, you kind of get to choose your chords, So you might have a song that you might even get away with playing on E standard if you had like the open chord or whatever. Like the song, The Dreaming Eye, that's kind of like on like the 6th fret, if I'm not mistaken. I only know because Dustin showed me when we played in Germany.
Yeah, it is. I had to think about it for a second. I'm like, you're gonna put me on the spot.
Yeah. No, this is
grab
fucking...
my guitar real quick and I'll tell you.
Yeah. No, this is fucking nerdy guitar talk here, But I'm interested to know. But one thing that you did a little differently on the latest was that you had a lot more open B, which I thought was pretty fucking cool as well,
Oh yeah, yep. And almost to the point. And I'm working on New Material right now too, and I start to get into the habit where I'm like trying to be like, okay, not every song can be in B. But it's hard not to do just because I love it so much. Just hitting that fucking lowest note, is really gratifying. And I think where a lot of that actually first came into my mind was really early on. I was in high school, and I was in my death metal band in high school, which was Excommunion back in the day. And but even before Excommunion, discovering the tribute to Euronymous comp, Nordic metal, that's
right on.
Necropolis had put out, and I had gotten it right when it was new. A new release, and that opening track by Abruptum, which is arguably their only like traditional, and it's still really fucking abstract. It's pretty weird, but their only traditionally metal track, one could argue. And I could be wrong, but I think it is in B, or it's damn near close to it. And I always just thought it was so fucking evil. It's heavy, but it's still black and dark and when I'm still to this day, I fucking love that song. So, I started kind of thinking down those lines, like, yes, I want to do black metal, but I want to do it in this low tuning. And, even with arguably some Black Death or death metal influences.
Well, for sure. I think one thing about it as well that must be very cool and satisfying, because you guys on this last one had a fucking tremendous production setting.
Sure.
And there's a lot that went into it. I mean, I saw some of Evan's footage in the studio when he was recording, and the studio you had just to record the drums looked fucking insane. And I love seeing like that kind of a setting dedicated to black metal, because it's notorious for sounding like shit,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
but when you've got the music that actually is suited to that kind of production, I fucking love seeing that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And Dave Otero, he kills it. So I've been working with him since forever, since I started doing this, basically. So
Yeah, there must be a real satisfaction that comes from coming up with a riff and it being in the demo phases, but then the more you start adding layers, and the anticipation of, I can't wait to hear this when it's kind of finished. Do you ever get that?
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I love the demo phase because I always that's my attempts at kind of mixing my own shit to whatever degree. And I love the raw style, and I always will. And I'm always just slathering on the fucking reverb and doing all the shit that I know that once I get to Dave's, he's gonna strip away, and you're kind of rebuilding it from there. Um, but at least it gives also him an approximation of like, okay, I think I know the direction he's trying to go with this. Now let's put it together properly.
Yeah.
And so it is interesting to hear it go from that kind of, that tin can kind of sound to like once we get in the studio and it's getting later into the production shit, and he's got it playing through his very high end monitors, and I'm just like, holy shit, this is all of a sudden has come to life and is massive. So yeah, it is interesting to see that all come together.
Absolutely. Do you ever recreationally listen back to your own stuff?
Oh yeah, totally. Yep. Yeah, I do. Yeah, and I was like, oh yeah, this is cool too, because it's got its own charm, its own kind of having that just fucking rawness, and then I start thinking like, maybe I should just fucking do another project where I just do it all myself and keep it fucking raw and dirty, which I'd love to do. It's just now, it's just time. I'm not quite as prolific as I used to be, so.
Well, it's time, and also like you only get to put out so many releases, and if you like overdo it, then it kind of like casts a shadow on your other stuff that you're doing as well. I have this fucking problem. Like last year I recorded 3 fucking albums. One of them was the new Trivex. Yeah, it's just like in fact, I'm lying. I recorded 4 albums.
No shit.
Yeah. Obviously, the degree of the production kind of varies in there, but 2 of them were like full-on studio albums. One was the new Trivex, which people will hear in like a month or so, and I'm exceptionally proud of how that one fucking turned out. But I've also recorded another album as well, which is the debut record for another project that we're doing called Weird Stuff, which is kind of like, we call it paleo black metal. I don't even know if it's black metal, to be honest. It's got like weird bits of dissonance, but we've got a guy, I don't even know like what his role in the band would be called, but he literally has a table of effects, and he's got this box with like these strings growing out of it, and that's attached to like a reverb pedal, and he sometimes hits on it and touches the strings, and it makes like tree wind sounds and shit. So and then we kind of mix that on top of it's by the way, I think it's completely down your alley, actually, thinking about it. Like I'll send you a picture of his setup. It's fucking unbelievable. Ian, he's the guy who does it. But yeah, we did the debut album for them. I did a re-recording of a Trivex album that we're going to redo later. And then I also did the album for Lavizon Jangal, which is going to be the last album of that band. So that was all just last year, and a couple of those are coming out this year. So, yeah. It's just one of those things.
Yeah. So, yeah. Well, and at least for me, I also realized I start falling into this kind of, I don't know, this issue where I could be working on something for one of my other projects, and you come up with just one, a couple really killer riffs, but then I'm thinking this could be a killer riff and would fit perfectly with Akhlys. And then you use it, and then you're like, wait, so you can easily start spreading yourself thin too, because not everything is going to be inspired at all times. So, I think, especially, at least for me, I feel like the older I get, the more careful I need to be with that kind of shit. Is maybe it's better to have a singular focus. Well, and then on the other hand, it could go the other way too, because Knox and I go down to the practice space, and I just have like this innate thing, this gravitation, and I always have, since I was a teenager, to write and play straight up death metal, just because I have a love for it. And we'll start fucking around with shit, and it's way too death metal for Akhlys, so that would just not fit at all, some of the shit that I'm coming up with. But I'm like, these riffs are fucking awesome. So who knows, once I have enough of that, then maybe it becomes the next Bestia, or whatever. But yeah, we'll see. But right now, I'm pretty singularly focused on Akhlys. So
yeah, and I think from an outsider's perspective, rightfully so as well. I mean, you mentioned it just there. That Bestia album's fucking killer, man. And the thing is, like, I'm of the mindset that I think why the fuck not? Like, let's say if you've got a singular project, and then if you've got something that's more death metal, then fuck it, do something that's a bit more death metal. I think it kind of breaks it up a little bit. I know maybe it's a nightmare for record labels, because then they don't know how to fucking sort of advertise it. But who cares? It's art at the end of the day. I actually, one of the things I loved about the last record was on Maze of Fobitor, where you've got the fucking the more low growls and the more singular fucking vocals, and then you've got the more open riffs on top. I fucking love that shit. I would actually say I'm more of a death metal guy than a black metal guy anyway. I just like the spirit of black metal. Sonically, I'm death metal pretty much like 80-90% of the way. So it's kind of like, if that's what you feel good doing and playing, you're already touring the band, you're already going around, and it's got the most attention and ear, so why not do something that you enjoy the most? Not saying you don't enjoy the Akhlys stuff, but just as an idea. That's more my approach anyway.
Yeah, well, I think Akhlys has always flirted with it anyhow. And like you said, like, especially on Maze of Fobitor, I mean, some of the rhythm riffs are very death metal. They got the straight up palm mutes and all that kind of shit in there. They just have those, the bumblebee attack fucking high lead over. That's become like one of our trademarks. So and that's the way it's going to keep moving. Anyhow, I can tell you already, like, and there will always be the atmosphere. But I think we're going to start turning the lights down more and more, just making it darker and darker. And, I always, I started in a place where it's like, I always loved like that kind of dark, majestic black metal, like, old school Emperor. And that was always a huge influence for me. And that kind of like stargazing type of contemplative, atmospheric black metal. But
you can definitely hear the Emperor in Nightbringer, that's for sure.
For sure, yeah, and a bit of it probably in Dreaming Eye too, even though Dreaming Eye gets a little more maybe dissonant and dark. But I'm leaning more towards that kind of dark heaviness and that kind of dreadfulness more so than and you'll probably see less of that the more majestic type stuff. That's it's still in even the last album. There's especially in parts of like Eye of the Damon Eye. But I'm kind of veering away from that more and more, and I think that you could see that anyhow as a progression since Dreaming Eye until the last one. So
yeah, absolutely. And well, I'm very happy to hear that. Like I said, and the one thing as well, credit to everyone else in the band. I've said this to you before, but you've got guys that doesn't matter what you give them, they're gonna be able to play it.
Yeah, which is nice to know. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Now, the one thing I've said this before, but like one thing about Akhlys is that obviously there's yourself, who are obviously exceptionally talented songwriter, even even just in terms of coming up with records and ideas conceptually, let alone the composition of the material itself. But you have some fantastic fucking musicians in that band, man. You know, I mean, your drummer, Evan, he is like a killer guitarist. And then you've got Dustin, who is a killer guitarist live, but then he's an even better drummer somehow. So,
yeah.
And then you've got Josh, who's just a fantastic dude and, you know, great stage presence. So it's like you've got a fucking solid band together, you know. And as I've come to kind of got to know those guys, they're, you know, you're one of my favorite bands to see or actually hang out with, you know. And the live, I really think that you guys, especially like in the last year or so, now that there's a few more tours and stuff under the belt, I think really have come together. Like when I saw you in Bergen, I've seen you a number of times, but when I saw you there, it was like, fuck, they got it, you know. Like it's like, it's fucking, you know, it's just at the right frequency between everyone, and you feel that energy when you're in the room.
Yeah, and that, you know, of course, that was kind of, you know, cultivated over time and experience. So, because we started off in the most horrible fashion ever when it was like the old lineup, and it was just a terrible fucking show, you know. And so, starting off like that is, you know, it's a weird way to begin things. But
are you referring to your first show ever?
Yeah, it was our first show ever, even though it was kind of weird because it was like it was supposed to be Aoratos, and then it was Ascension Festival in Iceland.
Iceland, yeah.
Yeah, and it was kind of, you know, it was a bit impromptu on our part because we barely even had a lineup together when we came up with the idea. So, but it was supposed to be Aoratos, and then they're like talking to the promoters, like, "Hey, you know, everyone would love to see Akhlys." And I'm like, "Fuck it, let's learn some Akhlys songs," and fucking really just were too green as a group with, you know, that lineup, and then we had a ton of technical difficulties. Like it was just insane. Like we got up on stage, and I think it was 30 minutes after the fact that we were finally able to start, just because like everything was fucking up and going wrong, and it was pretty terrible. We went from, you know, people were so excited to see Akhlys play live for the first time that whole place was packed front to back, and I think we made it halfway through the short set that we were allowed at that time, and about half the people were gone. So I was like, that's when, you know, things are going well. So it was a very humbling experience, and after that it was kind of like, yeah, fuck, never again. Let's reevaluate here and start over and do this correctly. So yeah.
I mean, when you're saying that, I mean, that's like, obviously it goes without saying that you have more than made up for it since then. But because I wasn't there at that show, when I was saying, like, I've never seen you play a bad set, you know, I was just saying that over time the bands just got fucking better and better. But so what was, if you don't mind, like, what was it specifically that was just terrible about it? Like, you know, like, how bad can it really be?
Just wasn't tight, just wasn't well put together, you know. I think a lot of bands probably, you know, have this story about their first gig. You know, it either goes one of two ways: it goes amazing, or it's just fucking total fucking disaster. Ours was a total disaster. So, and it wasn't until quite a, you know, I don't know, I want to say a year or more after that before we even played live again, you know. And then it was a, you know, a bit of a different lineup, and really took us, and we just practiced like crazy, you know. I mean, for a while there we were practicing 3 times a week religiously for, you know, a year or more, and we still do keep up, typically 2 times a week, and then we'll increase it to 3 times right before we go hit the road. So, but you know, these are things that you realize, especially playing shit like this, is like, yeah, you can't just like get together here and there then expect to fucking get up and kill it, you know, as a group, you know, even if as individuals, even if everyone's like a total badass. So like, you need to be doing it together, you know. At least that's how I feel about that. But yeah, I think so. You know, I kind of went into it with like, you know, had to have the redemption, you know, because I was like, I'll be damned if I'm going out like this. So
fair enough. There we go. Like I said, I think you've more than made up for it since then, man. You know, one thing to keep in mind as well, I mean, people who might not necessarily play in bands themselves or play this style of music, it's, you know, like your songs are particularly awkward to play, I imagine, not because of like the style of riffing, although you certainly need the right people. I think Dustin does a fucking great job of the leads live. I think he's fantastic at that. But it's the song structures. Those song structures are, you know, like for me, you know, as a listener, obviously, like I know a lot of the songs, but if I was to sit down and, you know, and I've got a very good ear for this stuff, you know, I pick up songs. I'm the kind of guy, you know, as you are probably, as soon as I hear a riff, I already know where it is on the guitar. I already know what it's doing. You know, I pick up on stuff like straight away, immediately, regardless of genre. But if you ask me like, okay, so how does the structure for like so-and-so song goes? I'm going to be like, I have no idea. It's like 9 fucking minutes long. And it's like, you know, it's like the same riff comes in like 10 times of those. And I have no idea where that is, you know, and that's an extra challenge for the musicians in the band, you know, to get those structures right, you know, which that's a real challenge in itself, I think, which again, the current lineup, as I've ever heard you guys play live, always pull that off, you know, which is extra rewarding for the audience then, because instead of thinking about what's the riff playing, what's the structure, you get to just get lost in the song and sort of have a more of a transcendental experience.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's not the easiest stuff to play. So, you know, I write. There's a lot of leads, and they're very unforgiving. So that's why I make Knox do them all.
Yeah.
Plus, the guy just has an uncanny. I like to think I'm pretty fast at picking, but he is just beyond. You know, just uncanny how fast that motherfucker can pick. So, so he handles all those leads live, so it puts me in this great position because then I could just write whatever and make him do it. So
and he played quite a bit on the last album as well, right? Which I think definitely contributed.
So basically I tracked the whole album as far as guitars, and then after I tracked it, because I kind of write as I track, and then after I tracked it, then he came and we just sat there and we'd go riff by riff and I'd show him the riff and then he'd retrack it, but you know, at his speed, you know, with his insane and
right.
So it added a nice edge to it, you know, that wasn't there on the previous ones, you know. So
yeah, that's cool, man. One thing that I, for whatever reason, even though you've been on the show a few times now, I've never really had the chance to talk to you much about it, was just your time with Nightbringer. So I'd like to maybe just shine the focus on that for a moment.
Yeah.
I mean, how the fuck did that band even come to be? Because it was just such a unique entity. Well, I say was, still is, because I understand that you're still working on some ideas for the band based on what you told me last time. But just how did all of that even come together?
Well, I started it in 1999 with Knox. And it was really like my first like serious attempt at doing black metal. Like, you know, we were both in Excommunion together. And actually when Excommunion started, it started off as a black metal band. It just quickly turned as we added members and then went in a different direction. So we decided we wanted to, you know, do just straight up black metal. And both of us were big fans of like early Emperor, a lot of the Norwegian shit like Menes and or Mains and early Arcturus, shit like that. But you know, of course the usual suspects, you know, Mayhem and whatnot. So Burzum. So it was just him and I, and you know, didn't really have much direction at first. Truthfully, it just kind of sounded like a black metal version of Excommunion. So so it was just him and I, and lived up in this at one point shortly after we formed the band, lived up in this cabin and with a few other people, and we'd be in the basement of this cabin. It was fucking freezing. There's no heat down there, and all we had when we'd write is we just had one guitar and like an old Casio keyboard. I'm not even sure if he had a drum set at that time, or if he did, if it was it was elsewhere. And so that's how it started, and just took us forever. We put together a 2-song demo that went basically nowhere except to a couple friends. And then we eventually kind of started to get our shit together over the years, but Excommunion started getting bigger because got signed to World War III Records when they were around back in the day, and they were kind of a big deal back in the day, and got on our first like legit tour with Excommunion, and we're playing Milwaukee Metal Fest and shit like that. And
Cool.
Yeah, so Nightbringer kind of was just kind of sidelined, but we were still wanting to do it. And then I eventually hit this point where I was just like, this is what I want to do. I don't want to do Excommunion anymore. And so I just kind of bowed out of Excommunion, and then it fell apart. And I know that a couple of the members probably weren't too thrilled with me because we were young kids. It was our first actual signing to a real label. And then shortly after, I was like, all right, later, guys. I'm doing Nightbringer. I'm doing black metal. So then it just kind of started slowly gaining momentum after that. And we recorded just 2 tracks with Dave. And this is like, shit, would have been like between 2002 and 2003. And put them up on the Full Moon Productions forum when that was still around, and then from there, it was those 2 tracks were really well received, and then Full Moon ended up picking us up. So then we added a couple more tracks and put out the EP, which was the Nightbringer Temple of Not Split, which was released in 2005 on Full Moon Productions, and then after that, we started to work on the full-length debut, which had all kinds of obstacles and fuckery that happened with it, but eventually that came out in 2008, also on Full Moon Productions. So then, by then, we're starting to get our shit together.
What were the obstacles and fuckery that went on with that?
Well, for one, we're poor, so it was like we were paying as we go, and Dave is a longtime friend, and we were in our mid-20s at that point, and Dave's the same age as me, so like we just pay him what we could and when we could, and record for as long as we could till we ran out, and then we'd go back up months later. And so that was the first issue, and then the second issue is we got, I want to say we were damn near the end of at least the tracking, and his studio got robbed. So, and back then it was, everything was like on ADAT, and all of it was gone. So we had like exports of just like the raw shit, which was kind of cool because we released some of it later, like raw versions of, and then we had to go essentially re-record everything again. So we went from 2005 having this EP, and we started working on the full length, like, because as you can imagine, we were really excited, to have the EP out, and I was absolutely thrilled because Full Moon Productions was such a big deal to me. To have something, have it released through them was really important to me. And then, we started working on shit right away because the fire was lit, but didn't come out until 2008. Just because of all the delays. So, but that's basically how it all got going. That's how it all started.
The thing that impresses me the most about Nightbringer, well, there's actually a couple of things which I want to get into, but one is just the fact that in the scope of US black metal in general, like there's quite a bit of a gap, like I think throughout like sort of like the early mid-90s all the way to like the 2000s when Nightbringer rears his head, at least in a more public thing. Obviously you guys started in 99, but it was later on that people, maybe like 10 years later when people actually like knew about the band, and you were I suppose more of a thriving part of the scene, because it's like, in your late 80s, early 90s, you obviously have Von. We can't mention American black metal without mentioning Von. Yeah. And you've got Profanatica, and I guess you sort of have Absu as well, although they were kind of edging on death metal very much as well. And then later on, you've got bands like maybe Cult of Azazel. That was another band as well. Or actually, I guess
Demon Sea, Crimson Moon, Abba
That's
Zagoroth. Yeah,
that's it. Yeah, but to me, the way I look at it is always like in my mind, bands like that really like made a difference. It's always like those bands that I mentioned, early 90s, Vaughn, maybe you could mention Acheron in there as well, and then there's nothing, Nightbringer. And then that's kind of like how I look at it, So how was it, 'cause one thing that stands out about Nightbringer, for anyone who would listen to the band for the first time is how much it's sonically, but also conceptually, I suppose, pushing the envelope for black metal's supposed to be. So where did that kind of direction come from, where it's like let's think outside the box here? How did that expansion come in?
Well, I think we took models like I'd mentioned before, like early Emperor, who was kind of taking a classical approach almost to the riffs, and the Norwegian bands that were similar to that, and then again like early Abigor, very similar, like a very classical approach to the riffs. And so you've got a lot of layering and you got a lot of point and counterpoint going on and stuff like that. And then, everything's kind of doing its own thing. The two guitars aren't mimicking each other almost ever. And then the keyboards aren't just mimicking the bass, they're all their own separate entities that are weaving in and out of each other. And I think that all of us had such a love for classical music and neoclassical as well. And then there was other non-metal bands that I was into, like Alend was huge for me from France. And
what was the name of the band again?
Alend. So
Alend.
So they've been around for quite some time. And the earlier albums that had a big influence on me, even since high school, is like L'éclance des Ténèbres. And then their big one for me, like the biggest influence was a little after that, called the Umbersun, which is just like grandiose, apocalyptic, neoclassical music. If you haven't heard them, definitely check it out.
I want to check that out. Yeah, that's why I asked. Cool.
Actually, NED Norma re-released several of their albums. So.
Now I'm second guessing if I might have already heard them. I will definitely check them out after this conversation. How do you spell the band's name?
ELEND. Alend.
Oh, I think I might have listened to
them.
They
have a ton of
I will
albums.
revisit this.
Winds Devouring Men, World and Their Screams, and there's Weeping Nights. They put out quite a bit of material. So they've been around since like early to mid 90s.
Yeah. Was there any? Sounds to me that there was absolutely no trepidations of, this doesn't fit into the style or this doesn't fit that. You were just kind of going like, let's make what the fuck feels right to us. So it's just an authentic and organic progression.
Yeah, exactly. If anything, it felt more true, I guess you could say. Like we always felt like we've always been diehards about that. Staying with true black metal. But I think that there's a lot of ways you can move with that, and especially with some of the second wave stuff, like you could have something like raw, like Mayhem, that's raw and blasphemous, or you could have something like early Emperor Arcturus, which is totally in a different direction. So
100%. Well, the second wave, I always say, when you ask someone what's the blueprint to black metal, in their head, they're probably thinking something along the lines of Transylvanian Hunger, both aesthetically and also sonically.
Sure.
But even in the context of Darkthrone, that's the only album that sounds that way.
Exactly. Which is probably my favorite Darkthrone album, truthfully. So
sure, it's a great album.
I say that, but that just that was definitely my style, that kind of cold and vampiric approach that they did on that one. And I mean, of course, I love the other ones too, like all the early shit, so Ablaze and so on and so forth. They're all great.
What I love on that album is, I think track 3, Scald of Satan's Sword.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
fucking killer one, man.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, those guys had some fucking such a genius, clever fucking music back then, you know, and it's just like in no way, shape, or form it can be replicated. But that's kind of, I think, you know, what you've done in particular, I have to give credit to you, is, you know, like when you want to talk about black metal, you know, I think you need to create something that you can't do what those guys did because it's a time relevant thing. It's a little bit like 80s punk scene. If you made that music now, people would laugh at you, be like, what the fuck is this shit, you know?
Yeah.
You know, but then at the time it was extremely relevant, or if you listen back to it, like the first fucking Cro-Mags album, you know, like that's a solid fucking record, you know, with like killer lyrics. But one thing that you have done is that you've added that layer of progression, you know, that sort of, this is the direction we're taking it. It's like, ooh, what's this, you know? You listen to it, and how much of that, so this is where I wanted to kind of segue into, is how much of the occult or the elements of occult and spirituality were also influencing this trajectory with the creativity of the band of, hey, listen, let's expound in this way, and how much of that was actually serving as a point of inspiration in itself?
Well, I think subconsciously it does, in the way that you know, whatever the aesthetic around the occult elements is going to subconsciously bring to mind certain kind of images. And often those images can be, especially with stuff at the time that I was into, anywhere from medieval to like Renaissance type, you know, darker imagery. And then you get this really gothic, Baroque kind of idea in your head as far as what the music should sound like, you know, to match that kind of imagery. That it seems to be part and parcel with, you know, stuff like ceremonial magic and those kind of things. So I think it only makes sense, you know, to go the direction that we went with that, because that was a lot of our focus, even early on, you know, which at the time I, you know, was pretty green as far as anything esoteric went, and you know, like most young kids, but you know, a lot of it was you know, Solomonic, you know, summoning of demons and stuff like that, and but still that fits that, you know, like what I was saying, anywhere from like a kind of a medieval to a Renaissance period esotericism, and then you know, the images that are going to come to mind when you mention those kind of things.
Was there okay then, so as you progress into that, was there any specific books or any specific topics that really grabbed onto your attention that you were like, ooh, I don't mind exploring that a bit more, which then I suppose maybe bled into the music as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that especially for Ophis and I, really got into stuff like Andrew Chumbley, who is part of this group called Cultus Sabati. His primarily his book Azawatia, and so it's kind of a what they would term like traditional witchcraft. I kind of prefer when he also refers to it as like the nameless faith, with a faith, which I find that to be more fitting. Witchcraft is just such a loaded term these days, you know. And so,
especially with all the witches of Instagram and all these chicks coming.
Christ. Yeah, that's why I don't.
Yeah,
it makes me sick. I just don't even want to associate with any of it. But
got it.
Yeah, so anybody that's familiar with that, it's, you know, it's ceremonial, but he's drawn in a lot of other aspects, like even like the like apophatic stuff, and kind of, which is like a via negativa, which is negative, I guess you could say, approach to magic, or to well, usually this is in a religious context, so it's like negative theology, and it's so what that would be is like in a religious context, or even in a Platonic, later Platonic context, this is realizing what God is. So so again, that could be in the Christian sense of God, or it could be in like, so if we're looking at like the Platonic philosophers, it's that's kind of a God as a placeholder. It's the absolute, but realizing what that is through a process of negativity by realizing what it is not. So it is, and it's this long negative process of God is not this, God is not that, until you have reduced it down to an absolute zero, which leads you to like a nothingness, and that's where you hit the point of paradox. But anyhow, I digress. So bringing in stuff like that and influences even from the Sufic stuff, which we've talked about before.
Yes.
And Andrew Chumley seemed to really find a lot of synchronicity with, again, some of the later Platonists, like Proclus and Plotinus, probably specifically, and maybe even Iamblichus. And so those were things that started to influence us quite a bit more as we kind of matured. With
So what would stand out about some of those things, so like, let's say if we were to dissect these for someone who's not aware, so what is it about those specific examples that stood out to you guys? Is there like a form, is there a particular practice? Is there a form of belief about any of those?
Yeah, well, this could get steep real quick. So unfortunately, there's no quick dissection of these individuals or their their forms of spiritual practice. But
Sure.
So what I had already pointed to can be one aspect of it that was important: the apophatic. Versus the cataphatic would be the opposite. So cataphatic would be more what you'd find probably more common in religions like Christianity, realizing what God is, and you get to the point where you say God is the tree, God is and this is the opposite. This is apophatic, and leading into like this into the state of nothingness. And so, I mean, you see this in Eastern religions too. I mean, nirvana, that's it's basically a nothingness. But for something to be eternal and something to be unlimited, it can't have any kind of adornment or restraints or categorizations or even a name. So it's truly is what falls into the term ineffable. And so if it's ineffable, it's unbound by any of that. So nothingness at this point is also everything, and so you can try and wrap your mind around that. This also is the same thing that you'll find in like stuff like Lurianic Kabbalah. Dive deeper into that. So it's a perennial idea that you're going to find cross-culturally and reach the state, which, the ego death. I mean, the depths of these meditative practices, or even heights of ritual ecstasy. They speak of the ego death, and what is that? What is that to exist with your ego, vacant, at least for a time, removed, and then you lose the dichotomy between subjectivity and objectivity. And so this is that point of paradox again. And so this is really the overarching theme that we became obsessed with, but we were using it more through, again, that traditional witchcraft lens, and which there's a lot of emphasis put on characters like Cain and Lilith and those kind of things. So
yeah. One thing about that I find really fascinating is that there is like a universal blueprint within that. That's, I think, part of the reason why you also see it in cross cultures is not just from for the sake of plagiarization, but there is like something inherently universal about it. Like I remember the very first time I ever tried LSD, I had a notepad in front of me, like, of course, psychedelics would be involved in this, but, yeah, I had a notepad in front of me, and I started with a pen. At first, I was just drawing a few things, trying to draw my own consciousness, and I was trying to draw who I was. Very, very profound experience, actually. I know it sounds, if someone's never tried LSD or psychedelics, it'll probably sound totally crazy and silly to them, but it's actually a very profound experience. For me, it certainly was. And I remember, that I was filling all of the blanks in this page, kind of like how you've got your arm blacked out with the tattoo. That I was doing the same thing to the note, and I was doing that because I was saying that, I was looking at the blank page as life. And I was saying that each sort of like thread of ink is an experience. And once you've completed it and the page is completely blacked out, you still have a blank page again. So again, speaking of that paradox that you're speaking of, I think it's that it was sort of that, like, once you fill the whole thing, then it's void, then it's something that you can get lost in. And I think in a spiritual context, it's an analogy that can certainly be made, because what is the context of nirvana, but also what you're describing about what is the, I suppose you're more referring to like the total absence of God in that sense, which is what perhaps some of these beliefs were projecting towards, or at least that's the understanding that I get from it. But also another...
Yeah. Well, and I would say so, and that's why God's a tricky term, because in something that we'd be aligning ourselves with, would it be like in the Christian or Catholic context of God, but in like again a late Platonic sense, it isn't the absence of God. It's actually paradoxically present, and so. That God is present, but again, this is not the guy in the sky that Christianity is talking about. It is there's better placeholders for that, like the absolute or the great good is what it was referred to sometimes, and it doesn't even have. And even the great good can be deceptive because there isn't necessarily there would be no moral context at that point. It's completely transcendent and ineffable. So, and they even speak about the Greek philosophers even speak about you shouldn't even have a name for it. You shouldn't say the name, because now by doing that you've now given it an adornment, a limitation. And so it's really stuff like God in this context is really just a signpost. It's referential because you can't. This is non-discursive. So to speak of these things discursively, you've got to use placeholders like that. So
that's such a fascinating point, and I get that. I totally get that. I suppose that's why even in the more, I suppose I don't want to use the term contemporary because I don't think that's accurate. But even in the sense of especially more the Jewish mysticism, you refer to God as Yahweh, and that's a word that no one even knows what's the correct pronunciation of it. And I think that's a bit more accurate because it's less limiting to the context. What's really interesting about what you're saying there is that the parallels that I'm seeing is ones that I recognize in conjunction to Zoroastrianism. Because I don't know how much you know about Zoroastrianism, but I've been reading about it more and more recently. I mean, it's only a part of my heritage, so fucking about time, right? Yeah. But one thing that I've been really one thing about it that's just really caught my attention is that, so you've got ancient Zoroastrianism, which is like known as the oldest religion in the world, okay? Mm-hmm. And then from there, when you you've got Zoroastrianism, it's the Indo-Europeans, it's the original Aryans from like North India and Aryans. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So from Iran, not the World War II term of it, the actual term of it I'm referring to. Of course. Yeah. Not to be mistaken with something else, but you've got the people on that part of the world, which we're talking maybe like 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. Okay. And their religion predominantly was Zoroastrianism. Now this, again, it's not the religion in the way that we recognize and understand it today, where you've got your institutions, you got your priests. This was actually something that was very much word of mouth, and it was like a common practice amongst certain specific people. And you can also imagine, what transfer of information must have been like fucking 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. It's certainly not the same as it is today. But the thing that happened is that years later, when Christianity and Judaism were actually in prominence, the Iranians, or the Persians rather, they actually started to implement more of an institutionalized approach to Zoroastrianism. Okay, so then they started to have like actual priests and people who would then do the rituals. Like there's a ritual where you have to come and beat a rope, and then that you're getting rid of the negativity, repelling the spirit of Ahriman. Now, the description of it, which I'm getting to, which I found a really interesting parallel with what you were describing there, is that in Zoroastrianism, unlike Christianity, where you have got the separation between body and the spirit, in Zoroastrianism, you've got like a vertical split where you've got good and then you've got evil. But in both of those camps, you already have the body and the spirit and all of the different manifestations across the world available. So that like the spiritual element like comes in as like a default belief, which I think is very interesting. So what would be good, which would be Ahura Mazda, would be life, birth, laughter, doing good deeds. And what would be Angra Mainyu, which is the spirit of evil, would be death, deceit, and decay, and all of these things. And what's interesting is that there was a particular sect within Zoroastrianism that came in later called Zurvanism, which I think is super fucking fascinating, because Zurvanism believed that these two entities were both primordial, and the entirety of existence consisted of their continuous battle with one another. And I think that's such a fascinating but perhaps accurate depiction of the reality as we know it.
Sure. So, yeah. Well, it's, one of the earliest, if not the earliest, dualistic religions. So kind of light versus evil. With Ahura Mazda, and Angra Mainyu, and interestingly enough, there was one take on it that Ahriman actually and his retinue of demons were connected to Draco and the Pole Star. So like the celestial north was their abode. So that's interesting to think of the abyss of Ahriman and his demons was actually the night sky, the vacancy of, space. And I always like that kind of Arctic north, celestial, metaphysical north connection, and then the connection to Draco and so on and so forth.
But also, what a crazy thing to come up with. Like, imagine back then, but you're not distracted by no cell phones or no OnlyFans, and you just look at the sky and try and find out what God is.
Fear the sky. Yeah, fear the night sky, because you're gazing into the abyss, So, yeah, that's absolutely.
It's fucking wonderful, man. I love this subject, because people look at it as this, we always use the term esoteric, and people always look at it as this like rare thing that's hidden in the corner somewhere. But to me, I look at it as like a blueprint of just understanding life. To me, religion is just as much as a part of science as is learning mathematics. These are all ways of decoding and understanding what the fuck we are and where we live in, But obviously it gets a bad name because of more organized religion and how they structure things, So I think you do need to look a little bit outside of the box, but also doesn't necessarily
modern
mean
orthodoxies. Unfortunately, it's kind of at least with most of them, the light has gone out of the temple, so to speak, and so are more concerned with exoteric forms of religion versus truly esoteric. So.
Yeah, very good point, actually. Yeah, I think that's kind of where the problem lies. I guess that's where the problem lies with a lot of things that I think humans kind of go wrong. We're always looking outside where we should be looking inwards.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but back to the influence, what we had spoken about, like the, so this apophatic approach to realize, the absolute transcendent divine, I guess. I'd rather say that than God, because again, people get confused and think I'm talking about something else. But we did have one of the Nightbringer tracks was "Let Silence Be His Sacred Name," and that gets again at that idea. So to speak the name of that would be to be the most efficient way would be to be silent.
Hmm. That's cool, man. I love it. One thing that about that actually is I always thought, because with different deities, if you want to talk different deities, different sort of demons or angels, I do believe that they obviously have a frequency of their own, whether it's communion with Kali or if it's with, I don't know, Horus or whatever, or Athena. I think that there's a frequency attached to all of these, and I always thought that Lucifer was a particularly, well, obviously misunderstood frequency, but I always thought that was actually very appropriate for the deity or for the channel. That the point in which, once you think about the name, the point in which your focus goes into, it's like a radio channel. Once you go into that channel's never the right channel. It's always like slightly just off of that, because I think it's a universally misunderstood character as a whole,
Sure. Yeah.
whether it's been cursed or adorned.
The etymology of his name right there, that it very complex, kind of, fallen angel or god form or whatever you want to call it, but as the Lightbringer. That's an interesting one, and can be related again perennially to many other figures. So that's the thing with gods.
Absolutely. So if Lucifer is the Lightbringer and you guys were in Nightbringer, does that mean you're pro-life or?
Yeah, everything is in opposites.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Noctifer. Yeah, that's
there you go.
That is part of the name. So it's kind of saw that as and then with the aspects of the morning and then the evening star. So it's kind of this in one sense, Lucifer is also related to Tiphareth, which is kind of like the sun, and then behind that is, in the Kabbalistic structure would be the, non-Sephiroth Deoth, which is kind of like the black sun or the hidden sun. But yeah, interesting figure. But we kind of even moved beyond a lot of that stuff and, don't really. It's not really a huge influence for me anymore. So more so I've gone further and further into like the Hellenics and the later Platonism and stuff that's related to that,
Okay, very cool. So is this like, I suppose, perhaps somewhat aligned with your own personal progression through life? Maybe some things you might have changed your mind on, perhaps?
Well, I think just through the study of these things,
right.
It just kind of led me to this point. So,
the reason why I mentioned that, sorry to interrupt you there. The reason why I mentioned that is because I'm always interested in the practicality of it. As you've probably already picked up, I'm always like, okay, well, this sounds cool, but how does it actually apply to real life and our understanding of things? So that's the part I'm trying to dissect here, really.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's exactly what it is the understanding of reality. It's the philosophy, not as it's understood in the modern context now. Philosophy, meaning the love of wisdom, was never divorced from the spiritual until modern times. And so, that's but it is an examination of reality. And when I'm saying reality, I'm not saying that from like the modern context of the materialist or the empirical scientist, that all they seem to account for is the quantitative and never the qualitative. Not realizing there's a term hylography, and where that's a combination of the two, basically an image and form, and the image or aesthetic not to be again understood in the limited sense of something that's because it's seen as subjective isn't real, is illusory. So I guess you could replace that with spirit. So you could say spirit and form. And so when I use the term reality, I'm using it again in a very Neoplatonic sense, late Platonic sense, in that reality would include, both the natural and the supernatural, or I guess you could say a more correct term would be preternatural. And so that would mean that so what I'm getting at here is stuff like whatever you want to term them, like incorporeal intelligences, like daemons, spirits, those kind of things, are part of that reality. Are it's normative. It's part of the entire structure. And not everything is just based upon causality. That you do have a pseudo causality that can apply, especially to the spirits or the daemons, and then you have the completely acausal, which usually would be attributed to something like gods, and it's funny when you say these things and you get like the knee jerk reaction from people that aren't spiritual, don't believe these things, and it's like, or they are the materialist, or at best into idealism, where it's like these things are valid only insofar as we exist, or to validate our own experiences, which I don't think both camps, there's a measure of truth to it, but that it doesn't look at the entire picture. But that when these people do get a knee-jerk reaction, like again, we can use the materialist as an example here, and then you can walk things backwards from the materialist standpoint to something like, because they're saying everything has to be causal, right? Causal and quantitative, and walk this backwards, and all of a sudden you end up at the Big Bang, and then it gets really difficult for them to rationalize. And I know that then we could get into like maybe like quantum physics or some shit like that, but whatever it is now you're at an acausal moment. And so for to cast out the possibility of the acausal occurring at any juncture in time, it's like, well, even your own structure starts with the acausal. And so that's just, and sorry, I kind of just went off on a rant there, but that's just kind of the way that I view things.
I love it, man. I'm all here for it. I love that view thinking. I mean, listen, there's that famous quote, is that all science demands one miracle, which is,
Yeah, exactly. So,
yeah. And I think that, and even that, did it actually happen? Was it perhaps we were somewhere else? Like one crazy fucking thought of that. I've never shared it here, but I think you went down exactly the perfect route for it. But, who's to say that that moment of Big Bang wasn't us being swallowed by a fucking supermassive black hole from somewhere else that we were in? Because there's plenty of theories and understandings that, we might actually be inside a fucking supermassive black hole right now. And, if the universe is expanding, what if it's this thing constantly like eating itself? I know that's a crazy fucking idea.
And what's it expanding into? So again, you're going to reach a limitation, since modern science is based again on the quantitative and what's reducible and categorizable. It can only go so far before you hit that into that horizon, because then you're like, well, what's beyond that? And then they could come up with whatever theory it is, and there's many theories around the Big Bang, and it's like, and you could just keep playing devil's advocate, and you go, yeah, okay, well, what caused that? What was before that?
Yeah,
like
and then eventually your brain just fucking breaks. Like mine has done multiple times.
The system breaks down at some point, so it can't be just 100% causality at all times. Like it doesn't work.
Well, one thing that I always find really interesting is that you can, when you start to struggle, and it's not to say that this is always the case, but always at least pay attention to religions, not in terms of just religious practice, but the history of religions. But what's a common story is the story of Adam and Eve. Well, basically the summary of that tale is that we were once in heaven and then we were cast down to earth. Well, what if that cast down moment is the devouring of the supermassive black hole, and then we got pulled into this side, and then our journey is to somehow make our way back, if not in the physical body, perhaps spiritually, you know?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I mean, you could theorize all day and night about these things. So, and I don't put too much, I don't worry too much about the, what's going on, in regards to these theories, like what's going on scientifically or within the physical reality of matter. Like, so I don't, I'm fascinated by black holes, of course, but I wouldn't, begin to equate black hole to like a divinity per se. So I see, anything that's occurring within the physical, as above, so below. So it's a reflection, and if anything, is that's the causality that's happening there would happen from the acausal to the causal, and so that would be the chain, and that's why you see this in any of these kind of religious structures that are based on emanationism. And so Kabbalah is based on emanationism. You have the supernal triad, and you have Kether is the crown, and then it's like God realizes himself, and then from there, it kind of sparks this whole process of emanation that goes from the supernal triad down through Deoth, and then into finally Malkuth and physical matter. But that's not unique to Kabbalah. We see this in Genesis with "Let there be light," and the 7 days, and you can find it all over the place. This emanationism. I think what's interesting is there's other takes on that are considered non-emanationist, and that I'll spare the listeners that diatribe for now, but it gets pretty brain bleeding. So, but really interesting.
For sure. Well, I think you used the perfect word there, which is reflections, right? Yeah. That's that will explain much of the parallels that we can see amongst the religions, and I always, having come from a background of, like strong Islamic fucking theocracy, and having nothing but disdain for the faith or the people who wield it, especially ones who use it as a form of authoritative power, to me, it's a cancerous thing. But I have over time realized that, in order to understand the world, you need to leave some room for those beliefs. You need to leave some room, so you might not necessarily go practice Christianity, you might not go practice Islam, you might not go practice Judaism, but you gotta understand what's actually going on there, and you need to give it the time of the day. Like when you were saying earlier, it just made, like, I was internally thinking about it, because you said, when people have this knee-jerk reaction the moment you even mention the word God. And, and to me, I do think it's a shame. I do really think it's a shame. I think modern religion's definitely responsible for that. They're definitely to be blamed.
Sure.
But I really think that people who, like, I could never fucking classify myself as an atheist, at least not anymore, like I've fucking seen enough by this point, besides my own personal preferences. I have just seen too much to feel or think that way. But it's literally like, living life as a, if you want to call it, atheist in the name of science kind of person, and I'm certainly not anti-science either at all.
No.
But, You know, as long as it's not science of the vaccines, I'm all good. But you know, as you know, like you got, you know, to me, living life as an atheist is like the same as showing up at a shooting range and deciding to go for like the fucking water pistol instead of everything else. You know, it's just like kind of like, you know, you're missing out so much. You know.
Well, and it again just reduces life experience to like kind of a nothingness, and just the, you know, again the qualitative, and says no, the qualitative is purely subjective, and being purely subjective, it is an illusion and has no value or place in reality. And they're basing this all off of a system that can only analyze the quantitative. And so it you know, plays by its own rules, and so anything that falls out of the rules, they say no. And I think you know, speaking of Islam and the Sufi tradition, I think one of the biggest things that can be relayed here is the idea of the imaginal. And I know we spoke of this briefly before. But in the Sufi tradition, the imaginal, which is more of a term that Henry Corbin, who was a Westerner who kind of brought the Sufic tradition into the West, but that's the term he used to describe this. They'd call it the eighth climate, and there's a lot of technical terms around it. But what this is it would be, so it's not to be confused with just the common imagination, you know, just whims or whatnot. It would be closer to like the Platonic forms, the realm of the Platonic forms, and it exists a priori to our thoughts, to human thought, and so it would exist whether we existed or not. You know, it would exist before us, and so this is also, you know, kind of synonymous with spirit, in a way. So you know, there's so much to that, and you know, sometimes it's just like, I don't care. I don't care to convince anyone. I don't give a shit. Truthfully, I don't care what people believe. Like, it's cool. Like, I've got very good friends that just are just like, shut the fuck up, dude. You know, like, whatever. Drink this beer and let's go fucking have fun or whatever. Eat out. I'm like, cool, whatever.
Sure.
And that's fine. But I just feel like at least my life would have a huge deficit if I hadn't begun to realize these things, if I hadn't studied these things, you know. And I'm no expert on any one of these things, not even close, you know. And to me, you know, what my God is, I've said before, and this would also be synonymous with the traditions I'm talking about, is mystery with a capital M. And so it can't be, you know, there is no resolution point. There's no solving it, you know. So life is, you know, an extension of that. You know, there is no, like, we got it all figured. We figured it out finally. Science has figured it all out, or even religion has figured it all out. It's
such
eternal.
a lazy way of thinking. I fucking hate that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, man. The one thing that you also said that I think is super important is you were saying that these definitions will come from quantitative measures. Well, there are many things which we, as far as we know, at least, we can't measure them. Maybe somewhere in the basement of Vatican, someone knows, you know, someone's got the scriptures for how to do it, or someone in the CIA knows, but most people don't. How the fuck do you measure the fact that if you're on a public transport somewhere and someone's looking at you from the back of your head, you know that they're looking at you, so you turn around and you lock eyes with them, and then they break their eye contact? Or being on the other side of that, all that kind of shit. How the fuck are you gonna measure that, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I think that the only thing that is truly purely quantitative without a qualitative aspect to it would be like an atom. You know, like, literally. But once you get beyond that level, the qualitative and the spirit of things starts to come into play. And I don't mean this in like a purely animistic kind of, you know, wildly animistic sense that every rock and tree has its own genius. But I mean, that is also a classical view. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And also, like, how do electrons know that when they are being observed, even if it's an actual image of them from the past, but you're looking at it in the future, they still change their format because they know they're being observed. How the fuck do you define that, you know?
Yeah, I mean, you could apply that too to probably ritual summoning. So,
now you're talking.
yeah. So, I mean, there's one view that that such things as any kind of, whether it's a intentional summoning or if it's an encounter with some kind of daemon or spirit or whatever, that it's maybe at best psychological in the sense that Carl Jung would see it. So he liked to dance right on the fringe there of depth psychology, the esoteric. So, and I think by the end of his life, he was probably danced right over that edge, but that's debatable. But anyhow, that's to say that the existence of said intelligence is 100% dependent on your thought, which is very solipsistic in a way, I guess. So that, it's kind of the whole paradigm. If you turn around, the thing no longer exists. It only exists if you're observing it, if there is the observed and the observer. And I don't believe that to be the case. So I believe that these things are autonomous, often autonomous. I mean, even things like egregores and tulpas, eidolons, which are seen as thought forms. I don't know. I have some speculations around that that's still might not be what they are. But anyhow, digressing again, I do think that these things are autonomous, and I do think that they're protean. So if that means like that they could possibly appear in one way to one individual, but in a different way to another individual.
Yeah, of course. But one thing that also kind of spawned this thought as well is that, people who report, just because you were talking about the observations of a thing and then, you look and then it's not there. So many people who've had paranormal experiences report seeing things at the corner of their eye, seeing a face.
Oh, the periphery. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And as soon as you turn, it's gone.
Yeah, absolutely. And really, I was kind of using that more like allegorically, like because of course, if it's something incorporeal, it could be there in a second, 1 second and gone another. But I mean that there's kind of this whole view, this philosophical view that even your couch only exists as long as you are observing it. As soon as you're not observing it, there's no more couch, and just ideas like that, applying that to this, which is to me just a stupid fucking idea. So
yeah, I've heard that idea before. I'm not too sure if I necessarily believe it either, because what's gonna take over is the nature ultimately, because
that is completely solipsistic, which is to say that that then at that point you're just believing like you are the only observer, everything else is contingent upon what you gaze upon. And it's almost kind of like a narcissistic view.
It's extremely narcissistic, and I can only imagine the kind of fucking person who came up with that, you know what I mean?
Like, and it applies to other individuals. It'd be like me saying Cheyenne only exists as long as I am observing him and validating to myself that Cheyenne exists.
Holy shit, bro! You got CCTV all over my fucking flat or something.
It's not you, but you could take these same kind of I don't know, strings of thought, I guess, and apply it to what we're talking about. So these are the things we ruminate on.
That's probably why our phones are constantly surveilling us, is to make sure that we still exist, huh?
Might be.
Yeah, no, it's such a fascinating thought, though, but I think that one thing that over the years I have actually become very careful and considerate with, and I've always saying to my partner, is because I'm a full believer of, that there's a spectrum, that there are different layers to reality, and that there are demons, daemons, should we say, and egregores, as you said. Like a mutual friend of ours, I've paraphrased what he said multiple times on this podcast, but it still makes me think, Giuseppe from Fides Inversa.
Mm-hmm.
When he first came on the show, which was like, that was also around 3 years ago or so, a while ago now, he said something that fucking like really stuck with me. And he said, what kind of an egregore did we all feed by thinking that COVID was going to be the end of the world? And,
absolutely. Totally valid.
Yeah.
Totally valid. Yeah. I think about those kind of things all the time, and it is feeding, and you get that many people behind it, because that's what, for anybody that's not familiar, that's how egregore works is it's a communal thought and almost a fanatical focus of the mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
And from the traditional, view that creates the spirit that then does become autonomous. I wonder if it's more already an autonomous spirit that's taking advantage of that and now clothing itself in what you're calling forward, but that's speculation. But yeah, no, that's great. And leave it to Giuseppe, huh?
Yeah, right. It's all his organic wine, it does something, I think.
Yeah.
No, he's a great guy, by the way. Shout out to him.
He's my brother.
Yeah, fuck yeah. But just coming back into it, I think it's a very valid point because, when we're talking about that, by the way, we're not specifically talking about just COVID being a thing, right? What we are talking about is the idea that when you've got, 7-8 billion motherfucking people on the face of the planet, if I can look at you in public and you and I, without knowing each other, if I'm looking at the back of your head and I'm looking at you and you turn around and look at me, or another example of it being that you start thinking about someone and then within seconds your phone starts ringing and their name pops up or a text comes through.
Yeah.
I think pretty much every one of us have experienced that. And I know some like fucking cynical science bitches will come out and say, oh, it's just coincidence. Fuck your coincidence. Shove it up your ass. That's not what it is. But, the thing, I just straight up, when you've got stuff like that, and we do not understand the power of the human mind. We are not even fucking close to understanding what the human mind is capable of. You've got people who can beat cancer just using their minds, and I've personally known cases of this. And there are like multiple cases of it. Or even for me, the fact that I was able to go from like 260 pounds to 180, that obviously it was physical work that had to be done, but it came from my mind. It came from envisioning it, visualizing myself stood on stage with a fucking six-pack, even though I was a fat fuck back then, but actually making it happen and then watching it happen and unfold in real time, okay? That's the power of the human fucking mind. Now, you got 7-8 billion people on the planet through media. If you project a certain image or a thought at them, and if they all simultaneously think that thing, you're going to be moving the world in whatever fucking direction that you want by doing that. And it's a game of numbers. It's a game of brain force. And I think that there are actually a few things that's happened in the more recent times. Some terrible things have happened, but also some things have happened where we have all dodged bullets by the fucking ear, right? And I mean all of us, all right? And I think people should really count their fucking blessings. More importantly, we need to be more careful with what we allow our attention to be captured by, what we allow, like every time you scroll on social media, something's going to emotionally activate you and you're going to respond to it, and your mind and your brainwaves are going to go in that direction and they're going to feed it somehow, good or bad, whatever it is, it's taking away from you. So that it's almost like it's taking your investment, which is in the form of an attention. So it's something that over the years I've become so fucking careful with, with what movies I watch, what music I listen to, what podcasts I listen to, it's very important. I think we should all pay extra attention to that.
Yeah, I mean, shit. At this point, I'd recommend people stay off of fucking social media at least as much as possible.
Yeah.
You know, use it as your tool if you're doing that. But more and more, I've experienced it. The more I'm just like, fuck this thing, fuck
Yeah.
all of it.
Yeah, man. For me, if it wasn't for running a business, for having a band, for having the podcast and all of the stuff that I do, mainly I would say is the business and the band. You know,
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah.
I would not be on there. I would not be on there.
I hear you. But I even,
Yeah.
even like removing it from my phone. So it's like I have to intentionally sit down now to fucking make sure I'm checking my, the band stuff and all that kind of stuff. And so, it keeps you from mindlessly just going.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it, and then you like something and then someone else sees what you've liked. It's like, hey, do you know that person's a fash, and then they start going Yeah. Well, I don't think that's happened, but yeah. Or it's like the worst is when, like if someone's like, I don't know, like the worst of it is because you have to understand it's a public situation, So even something as harmless as like liking a friend's picture or like a girl's picture or whatever, that's publicly there, that immediately creates chatter. Oh, that guy from that band is like liking that girl's picture. Everyone starts fucking chatter, it's just fucking crazy world,
Oh yeah, how many fucking relationships have been fucking destroyed by social media?
Yeah, by all those fire reacts, man. That's what's doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's true.
Well, there you go. People got to remember to just put a cap on it. Kyle, my man, brother, holy fuck. I think this has been my favorite chat we've ever had on this podcast, man. Holy shit.
Yeah, it was good conversation, man.
Yeah.
I always appreciate it. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you, man. Thank you. I'm looking forward to, hopefully seeing you at Fortress very soon.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. You looking forward to it?
Oh yeah, definitely. It's been a minute since we played, so I'm looking forward to, getting back out there again. And I've only been to London so far, so it'll be cool to be in the UK, so.
He's, where he's got the venue set up, I'll give him credit for that. It's a very cool venue. We played it the first year, I think, he did Fortress. And it's a very cool place. Scarborough's cool, because I went there on my birthday 4 or 5 years ago on my own and went to this fucking camper van with no electricity for 3 days in the middle of bumfuck nowhere. Like, it's 5 miles outside of Scarborough. And and I had a hell of a time, That's how I celebrate birthdays, if I'm on my own, So
yeah, it sounds like my kind of place. So
yeah, it's cool, man. You'll definitely enjoy it. Hopefully, if I see you there, I'll take you around and show you some cool stuff around there. So there's a very cool castle just on top of the hill from where the venue is. Highly recommended.
Okay, cool, perfect. Yeah, I'd love that.
Awesome, brother. Well, I appreciate the fuck out of you, Kyle. Wishing you all the best, man, and hope to see you soon. Thank you so much for your time.
All right, cheers, man.
Hell yeah. To everyone listening to the podcast, hope you enjoyed the fuck out of this one. I know I did. We'll see you next time.